Welcome and settle in. Let the noise of the day fade away, like ripples on a still pond. We're about to journey back in time, drifting on the soft currents of history to a forgotten age, an era shrouded in mist and legend. Close your eyes, if you feel comfortable, and let your mind wander with me into the heart of ancient Gaul, to the realm of the Franks. Before the grand cathedrals pierced the sky, before the knights in shining armor rode forth on crusades, there was another dynasty, a line of kings so enigmatic they seemed more myth than reality. These were the Merovingians, the long-haired kings. They were said to possess mystical powers, their uncut hair a symbol of their sacred connection to the divine, the source of their strength and the right to rule. It was believed that if their hair was shorn, their power would vanish, their magic lost to the world. Imagine dense, primordial forests, where sunlight dapples through the leaves, illuminating hidden groves. It was in these lands that the Merovingian kings held court, not in grand palaces of stone, but in sprawling villas surrounded by nature. They were guardians of an ancient wisdom, a knowledge that whispered of a lineage far older and more sacred than most could comprehend. Their story is not written in grand chronicles, but is pieced together from fragments, from whispers in monastic libraries, and from symbols carved into stone. Think of the humblebee. To us, a simple insect of the fields, but to the Merovingians, it was a profound symbol of immortality and resurrection. When the tomb of King Childeric, one of the earliest Merovingian rulers, was discovered centuries later, it was not filled with just gold and jewels. It contained over 300 golden bees, their delicate wings meant to carry the king's spirit into the next life. This bee, this tiny emblem of a forgotten belief, became a thread connecting their time to ours, a symbol later adopted by emperors who wished to claim a piece of their legacy. It's a code hidden in plain sight, a secret language of symbols. And what of their power? It was said to be conferred not by conquest alone, but by a sacred anointing, a ritual of immense spiritual significance. Legend speaks of a holy vial, the Sanct Ampulle, filled with a celestial oil, brought from the heavens by a dove at the baptism of their first Christian king, Clovis. This sacred oil was believed to consecrate the monarch, linking the earthly king to the heavenly kingdom, making him more than a mere mortal. It was a physical manifestation of divine right, a secret that set their bloodline apart from all others. This ritual was the source of their mystique, the bedrock of their reign. The stories tell us that these kings were healers, that they possessed the ability to mend the sick with a simple touch. They were thaumaturges, worker of miracles, their very presence a source of blessing and prosperity for their people. Was this mere propaganda? Or was it a folk memory of a genuine, spiritual inheritance? The truth lies somewhere in the quiet spaces between history and legend, in the tales passed down from one generation to the next, becoming softer and more dreamlike with each telling. The Merovingian line didn't end with a thunderous battle. It simply faded. They were called the do-nothing kings by those who came after. Their power slowly usurped until they were but ghosts in their own courts. But did their bloodline truly vanish, or did it simply go into hiding, preserved in secret, its descendants walking among us, unaware of the ancient power flowing through their veins? This is the central mystery, the question that echoes down the centuries. The idea of a sacred bloodline, a hidden heritage, has captivated seekers and storytellers for ages. It's a tale that suggests that the greatest truths are not always the loudest, but are often found in the quietest of whispers. These are not just tales of kings and queens, but of a deeper current running beneath the surface of official history. It is a code, not of numbers and letters, but of blood, of symbols, and of faith, a code etched into the memory of the land itself, waiting in the weathered stones of ancient chapels and in the names of old villages. It is a puzzle where the pieces are scattered across a continent and across 1,000 years of time. We see hints of it in the legends of the Holy Grail and the rise of the Knights Templar, who would later seek to unearth ancient secrets in the Holy Land, and in the enduring mysteries that surround the true nature of power and divinity. So, just allow yourself to drift. Let these images of long-haired kings, golden bees, and sacred oils paint a landscape in your mind. There's no need to follow every word. No need to hold on tight. Simply let the story wash over you, a gentle tide pulling you further into a world of dreams and secrets. The air is cool, the night is quiet, and the path into this forgotten history is open. Let your breath be slow and steady as we continue to explore the shadows of the past, seeking the faint light of the Merovingian legacy. Stay with me, get comfortable, and let's see what secrets the darkness holds. As the last echoes of Rome faded, a new people, the Salian Franks, stepped from the misty forests of Germania into the waning light of the empire. They were a confederation of tribes, warriors bound by oath and kin, drawn to the fertile lands of Gaul like moths to a dying flame. Their world was one of dark woods and winding rivers, where the old gods still whispered on the wind and the future was read in the flight of birds, or the ripples on a still pond. They were not yet conquerors, but rather settlers, soldiers of fortune, and foederati barbarian allies serving a Rome that was becoming more a memory than a reality. They settled along the river Scheldt, their small kingdoms like islands in a sea of change, their long hair a symbol of their freedom and their royal power. In this twilight world, where history and myth bleed into one another, the figure of Merovech emerges, not from a palace, but from the depths of the sea itself. The story, woven by chroniclers centuries later, tells of a queen, the wife of King Clovis, who went to bathe in the ocean at noon. As she waded into the cool embrace of the waves, a creature from the deep, a quinatora beast of Neptune, with the form of a bull and the spirit of the Sais, said to have found her. From this strange and mystical union, a new bloodline was born. Merovech, the child of two worlds, carried in his veins the blood of a Frankish king and the salt of the ancient, unknowable ocean. This was no mere fairy tale for a child's ear. It was a foundation myth, a way of explaining the unexplainable, of lending a divine and supernatural origin to a lineage of kings who would command not by right of Roman law, but by the power of their sacred blood. The sea, for the ancient world, was a place of mystery, of creation and destruction, the source of life and the abyss of the unknown. To be born of it was to be touched by the gods, to be set apart, to carry a destiny greater than that of ordinary men. The story of the Quinator was a powerful omen, a declaration that these new kings were not simply warlords, but beings intrinsically linked to the primal forces of nature itself. The early chroniclers, men like Gregory of Tours and the later Fredegund, were tasked with a delicate and monumental work. They were writing the history of a people who, for generations, had kept their records, not in books, but in songs and epic poems recited around a hearth fire. These writers stood with one foot in the fading light of Roman literacy, and the other in the oral traditions of the Germanic tribes. They gathered the fragmented memories, the heroic lays, the genealogical whispers, and began the slow, careful process of weaving them into a single, coherent narrative. They were not simply recording facts. They were shaping a memory, transforming chieftains into kings, and battles into epic struggles that would define a nation. In their hands, the past was not a fixed and solid thing, but a fluid and malleable element. They wrote with purpose, often to legitimize the very kings they served, to anchor their patrons' power in a deep and resonant history. When Gregory of Tours looked back at Merovech, he saw not just a historical figure, but a symbol, the patriarch of the Merovingians, the long-haired kings. He and others who followed smoothed the rough edges of oral tradition. They connected disparate events, and they infused the gritty reality of the migration era with a sense of wonder and divine providence. They selected which tales to tell and which to leave in the shadows, crafting a story of origins that was as much about the present as it was about the past. And so, the legend of Merovech, the sea-born king, became the cornerstone of a dynasty. It explained their almost magical aura, the reverence with which their people held them. To challenge a Merovingian king was not just to challenge a man, but to defy the very omen of the sea, to question the sacred lineage that flowed from that mystical encounter on a forgotten shore. The story served as a powerful piece of political theater, a constant reminder that these rulers were different, their authority flowing not from a senate or an emperor, but from a source far older, far deeper, and far more mysterious. The hair that they grew long and uncut was the visible sign of this covenant, a living testament to the wild, untamed power that ran in their blood. The world of the Salian Franks was one where omens were not merely superstitions, but lived realities. A flight of crows, the sudden flooding of a river, a child born with a strange mark were messages from the other world, signs to be interpreted by seers and wise women. The birth of Merovech was the ultimate omen, a sign that the destiny of the Franks was now intertwined with the elemental forces of the world. It suggested a future not as subjects of a crumbling empire, but as masters of their own fate, a people guided by a king who was part man, part myth, a living bridge between the world of mortals and the mysterious realm that lay just beneath the surface of the water waiting in the deep. This was the memory they chose to create, a story whispered from one generation to the next, a legend that would echo through the stone halls of their future kingdoms. In the quiet shadows of history, where myth and truth intertwine, we find Clovis, king of the Franks. His reign was not merely a conquest of land, but a conquest of the soul. A delicate negotiation between the temporal and the divine. The concept of kingship was changing, evolving from a simple matter of battlefield prowess to something far more profound, something sacred. The air in Gaul was thick with new ideas, a blend of Roman legacy and Christian faith, and it was in this fertile ground that the seeds of a new kind of monarchy were sown. The king was no longer just a warlord. He was becoming God's chosen, a vessel for divine will on earth. This transformation was not loud or sudden. It was a gradual dawning, a slow-burning flame that would illuminate the path for 1,000 years of European history. Imagine the city of Reims, not as we know it today, but as it was then, a place of quiet importance, a spiritual center awakening to its destiny. It was here, tradition tells us, that the true miracle of Frankish kingship was revealed. The baptism of Clovis by Saint Remigius was more than a personal conversion. It was a public declaration, a sacred pact. But the legend that grew around this event is where the true power lies. The story of the holy oil, to Sainte Ampoule, is the heart of this mystery. As the moment of anointing approached, the chronicles whisper, the chrism, the consecrated oil, was found to be missing. In that moment of crisis, a dove, whiter than snow, was said to have descended from the heavens, carrying in its beak a vial of oil sent directly from God. This was no ordinary oil. This was a physical manifestation of divine approval, a tangible link between the king and his creator. The act of anointing, of touching the king's body with this celestial substance, became the central rite of legitimacy. It was a sacrament that set the king apart from all other men. He was no longer just a leader chosen by his warriors. He was now the Lord's anointed, his authority sealed not by the sword alone, but by the grace of God. This single act, repeated for centuries in the hallowed space of Reims Cathedral, became the unwritten code, the quiet source code of French monarchy. It was a powerful symbol, understood by noble and peasant alike. It whispered of stability, of divine order, of a kingship that could not be challenged by mortal hands. The symbols that emerged from this era were potent and enduring. The dove, representing the Holy Spirit, became a sign of divine intervention in the affairs of the kingdom. The fleur-de-lis, which legend says was given to Clovis at his baptism, transformed from a simple floral emblem into a symbol of purity, light, and the divine right of kings. These were not mere decorations. They were a visual language, a shorthand for a complex theology of power. They adorned banners, were stamped on coins, and carved into the very stones of the cathedrals. Each time they were seen, they reinforced the central idea. The king of the Franks and later of France ruled not by accident of birth or by might, but through a sacred covenant, a promise made in the dim light of a Reims chapel sealed with oil from heaven. This lore of anointing created a mystique around the monarch that was almost priest-like. The king became a mediator, a bridge between the celestial and the terrestrial. He was expected to be a just ruler, a protector of the church, and a shepherd to his people, not just because it was politically wise, but because it was his sacred duty. His coronation was a blend of warrior acclamation and religious consecration. The shouts of his men were now echoed by the chants of the clergy. The crown and the scepter were physical objects, yes, but the anointing was what truly made him king. It infused his very being with a sacred character, making any act of rebellion not just treason, but sacrilege. It was a profound and deeply resonant idea that captured the imagination of a people searching for order in a fragmented world. The power of this narrative cannot be overstated. It provided a foundation of legitimacy that weathered dynastic changes, civil wars, and foreign invasions. Even when a king was weak or foolish, the institution of sacred monarchy remained strong, anchored by the memory of that miraculous moment at Reims. The story of the Sanctumpule was told and retold, embellished and passed down through generations, becoming more potent with each telling. It was a foundational myth, a story that explained why things were the way they were, and why they should remain so. The quiet birth of this code, this fusion of faith and power, created an aura of permanence, a sense that the Kingdom of France was not just a political entity, but a sacred project willed into being and sustained by God himself. The king's body was a temporary vessel, but the sacred oil promised an unbroken line of divine favor, a continuous flow of grace from the heavens to the throne. And so, in the hushed halls of power and the quiet reverence of the cathedral, a new form of kingship was born. It was defined not by the noise of battle, but by the silent touch of holy oil. It drew its strength not from armies alone, but from a story of a dove, a vial, and a pact between heaven and earth. This was the true inheritance of Clovis, not just a kingdom of land and people, but a kingdom of the spirit, built on a foundation of sacred lore and divine right. The anointing at Reims was the quiet beginning of it all, the moment when a king became more than a man, and a kingdom became more than a territory. It became a reflection, however imperfect, of the divine order, a sacred realm presided over by God's chosen servant on earth. This profound idea, born in the twilight of the Roman world, would shape the destiny of a nation and echo through the corridors of European history for a millennium to come. The forest floor is soft with fallen leaves, each one a whispered story from seasons past. Imagine walking through these ancient woods, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and pine. Here, among the gnarled roots and towering canopies, the veil between worlds feels thin. It's in places like this that the stories of the seeresses, the Vavlor, were born. They were women who could read the rustling of leaves, the flight of birds, and the patterns of the stars. They didn't command armies, but their words could turn the tide of kingdoms. Their power was not of the sword, but of sight, deep, intuitive understanding of the world's hidden currents. This sacred sight was often linked to the physical body, two things that grew and held life force. Consider the hair, long and uncut, a river of personal history flowing from the crown. For the Merovingian kings, their long hair was not a matter of fashion. It was a physical manifestation of their asterisk. Heil asterisk, their sacred luck and kingly charisma. It was their connection to the divine, a tangible symbol of their right to rule. To cut this hair was not just an insult. It was an act of sacrilege, a severing of their power at its very source. It was to render a king powerless, to make him no more than a common man. This belief was so deeply ingrained that a shorn king was considered unfit to rule, his connection to the gods and his people irrevocably broken. Now, picture a queen like Brunhild. She enters this world not just as a bride, but as a carrier of her own legacy, her own potent lineage. A Visigothic princess, she was raised in a court that blended Roman sophistication with Germanic tradition. She was educated, intelligent, and fiercely aware of her own worth. When she married into the Merovingian dynasty, she didn't simply assimilate. She brought her own power, her own understanding of the world, into the chaotic heart of the Frankish courts. Her long hair, too, would have been seen as a sign of her noble status and her own inherent power, a visual promise of the strong heirs she was expected to produce. She was not merely a vessel for a royal bloodline. She was a confluence of two powerful streams. In the shadows of this court, another queen, Fredegund, moved with a different kind of power. She began not as a princess, but as a palace servant. Her ascent was fueled by raw ambition and a cunning that was both feared and respected. Where Brunhild wielded diplomacy and lineage, Fredegund wielded secrets and a deep understanding of human nature. She knew the power of a well-placed word, a whispered rumor, a perfectly timed accusation. She was a mistress of the courts, navigating its treacherous tides with a skill that was nothing short of masterful. Her influence was not written in treaties, but in the allegiances and enmities that she cultivated in the dimly lit corridors of power. While she may not have had the overt sacred status of a born royal, she cultivated her own aura of mystique and danger. These two queens, Brunhild and Fredegund, became locked in a rivalry that would span decades and shape the fate of the Frankish kingdoms. Their conflict was more than a personal feud. It was a clash of different forms of power. Brunhild, the foreign princess, striving to impose order and a sense of Roman-style governance on a fractious warrior nobility. Fredegund, the insider, using her intimate knowledge of the court to protect her own position and that of her son. Their battleground was the kingdom itself, and their weapons were alliances, assassinations, and the very future of their children. Each birth of a son was a victory, a promise of continuity. Each death, a devastating blow. Amidst this political turmoil, the ancient beliefs still held sway. Omens were seen everywhere. A comet streaking across the night sky was not a celestial event, but a divine message, a portent of war or the death of a king. A dream could be a prophecy, a warning from the spirit world. The chroniclers of the time, men like Gregory of Tours, recorded these events with the same gravity as they recorded battles and treaties. For the people of this era, the supernatural was not separate from the natural world. It was woven into its very fabric. A sudden illness, a crop failure, a difficult childbirth, all could be attributed to a curse, a loss of divine favor, or the malevolent workings of an unseen enemy. In T's world, the sanctity of a person was not just a spiritual concept. It was a physical reality. The king's body was sacred. The queen's body, as the vessel for the next generation of rulers, was equally protected by taboo and tradition. An attempt on their lives was not just a political act. It was an offense against the gods and the entire community. And so, the queens had to navigate this world carefully, always aware that their every action, that every word, even their own health, was being scrutinized for signs and omens. Their lives were a constant performance of power, piety, and fertility. This is where the idea of the series reemerges. Not necessarily as a specific role, but as an attribute that a powerful woman might possess. A queen who seemed to have uncanny luck, who could anticipate her rivals' moves, who could give birth to strong sons while others faltered. She might be seen as having a touch of that ancient sight. Brunhild, with her political acumen and incredible longevity, might have been viewed as having a powerful asterisk. Heil asterisk of her own. Fredegund, with her uncanny ability to survive and thrive against all odds, could easily have been perceived as someone with access to hidden knowledge, perhaps through darker, more mysterious means. Their power was amplified by the superstitions and deep-seated beliefs of the age. They were more than just women. They were symbols, their lives playing out a grand drama on a cosmic stage, where every gesture held meaning and the rustle of a silk gown could sound like a prophecy whispered on the wind. The river murmurs stories older than language, its currents a liquid memory of the land. It carves the valley not with force, but with persistence. A lesson in gentle power. Along its banks, the lilies bloom, their white petals like stars fall into earth. Each one, a marker on a map only the initiated can read. They are not planted by human hands, but seeded by the current, following the water's sacred geometry, a living constellation mirroring the one above. These are the veins of the earth, and the lilies are the pulses of life that travel along them, connecting grove to grove, stone to stone. They signal a presence, a continuity that flows unseen beneath the surface of the world. A silent promise whispered from the soil to the sky. Follow the lily path away from the water, and you will find the groves. Here, the air grows still and green, filtered through a cathedral of leaves. Sunlight dapples the forest floor, illuminating patches of moss and ancient roots that buckle the earth. These are not just collections of trees, they are living sanctuaries. Each oak, each ash, each yew is an anchor, holding the memory of generations. Look closely at the bark of the oldest ones. You might find a carving, a simple mark almost lost to time and weather. These are not graffiti, but sigils, the signatures of those who came before, who understood the language of the wood and the wind. They left their mark to say, "We were here. We remember." These groves are libraries of the spirit, where knowledge is not written in books, but is absorbed through the soles of the feet and the breath in your lungs. The bees know this. Watch them as they move from the river lilies to the blossoms in the grove, weaving an invisible thread of connection, a golden trail of pollen that binds the water to the wood. They are the keepers of the unseen pathways, the tiny messengers of the land's soul. From the quiet shade of the groves, the land rises towards the open sky, and here stand the megaliths. They are bones of the earth, thrusting upwards, gray and silent against the shifting clouds. Some stand alone, solitary sentinels. Others are gathered in circles, as if in permanent, silent conversation. Run your hand over their surfaces, feel the grit of lichen, the cool, unyielding stone that has weathered millennia of sun and rain. Here, too, are carvings. But these are deeper, more deliberate. Spirals that echo the eddies of the river and the shape of distant galaxies. Lines that map the rising and setting of the sun on the solstices. These stones are not mere monuments. They are instruments. They are calendars, compasses, and conduits, focusing the subtle energies of the land. They mark places where the veil between worlds is thin, where the songs of the earth can be most clearly heard. The lilies often grow in their shadow, a delicate counterpoint to their immense, raw power. The megaliths hold a deep memory, the foundational hum of the landscapes being. Stretching out from these ancient centers of power are the faint lines of the old roads, not the tarmacked arteries of the modern world, but the straight, purposeful tracks laid down by the Romans. They built upon paths that were far older, tracks worn by bare feet and hooves, long before the legions arrived. These roads were pragmatic, designed for trade and conquest, but they could not help but follow the land's energetic lines. They cut through fields and forests with an unwavering logic, connecting sacred site to sacred site, often without their builders even knowing it. Walk along these verges. You can still feel the echo of countless journeys, the phantom footfalls of pilgrims, soldiers, and merchants. The roads themselves have become part of the sacred geography, arteries that carried not just goods and armies, but stories and bloodlines. They are the straight lines that stitch the circles and spirals of the older world together, creating a new, more complex pattern on the face of the land. The bees, in their own straight flight paths back to the hive, seem to mimic this ancient geometry, a reminder that the most efficient path is often the most sacred one. Where the roads falter and fade, the burial fields begin. These are not somber places, but gentle, rolling landscapes of mounds and barrows, the soft green humps like the sleeping bodies of giants. Here, the ancestors rest. The earth holds them, and in return they nurture the earth. It is a place of profound peace, where the cycle of life and death is made tangible. The lilies are often thickest here, growing in profusion over the mounds, their roots drawing sustenance from the deep past. It is said that each flower is a soul, a light that has returned to the surface. The marks here are not carved in stone or wood, but are written in the very shape of the land. Each mound is a syllable, each cluster a word, forming a silent eulogy that has been spoken for thousands of years. This is the final repository of the bloodline, not an end, but a transformation. The bees hum their low song, a constant, living drone that connects the flowers of the living with the dust of the dead. They are weaving it all together. The rivers flow, the groves shade, the stones power, the roads line, and the ancestors rest. It is all one story, one continuous thread, one sacred map. In the quiet scriptoria, where the only sounds are the scratch of the quill and the rustle of vellum, time itself seems to bend. Think of Luxeuil, a beacon of learning in the heart of Merovingian Gaul, founded by the Irish wanderer Clovis. Here, in the dim light of tallow candles, knowledge was not merely coped, it was woven into the very fabric of the manuscript. The Irish monks brought with them a love for intricate design and a penchant for puzzles. Their unsheathed script, rounded and generous, carried more than just the sacred texts. It carried a memory, a lineage traced back not through blood, but through scholarship. Look closer at the margins of these ancient books. A world unfolds in these liminal spaces, a tiny, doodled face, a pointing hand, a whimsical beast coiled around an initial. These are not idle scribbles. They are whispers from the past, a scribe's momentary commentary, a signpost for a future reader, or perhaps a private joke shared across centuries. This is the marginalia, the quiet conversation happening just outside the main text. It's a parallel narrative, a testament to the human hand that guided the pen, a reminder that these sacred objects were made by people with thoughts, fears, and a need to leave a personal mark, however small. The encoding grew more complex, a game of intellect and spirit played out on the page. Acrostics, where the first letter of each line or paragraph spells out a hidden name or message, were a favorite tool. A prayer, a dedication to a patron, or the name of the scribe himself, secretly embedded for the discerning eye to find. It was a signature of the soul, a way of saying, I was here without breaking the humble anonymity expected of a monk. The page becomes a treasure map, and the text, a key to a lock you didn't even know was there. Each letter, a choice. Each word, a piece of a larger, unseen design. Consider the calendars. The Computus manuscripts used to calculate the date of Easter. They seem, at first, to be simple tables of numbers and lunar cycles. But within their structure lies a profound understanding of time, cosmology, and divine order. These were not just tools for liturgical planning. They were models of the universe as understood by the monastic mind. Every number held significance. Every alignment of celestial bodies echoed a spiritual truth. The complex calculations were a form of meditation, a way to align the rhythms of monastic life with the grand, cosmic dance of creation. The universe was a text, and the monks were its most patient readers. Numerology was another layer of this silent language. In a world where everything was seen as a sign from the divine, numbers were imbued with deep symbolic meaning. 3 for the Trinity, 7 for the days of creation and spiritual perfection, 12 for the apostles. When a scribe chose to arrange a text in a certain number of columns, or use a specific number of lines on a page, it was rarely an accident. It was a deliberate act of theological expression, a way to infuse the physical object of the book with a spiritual resonance. The very structure of the page became a sermon, a quiet reflection on the divine geometry of existence. A gospel book with 4 distinct decorative styles, for its 4 gospels, wasn't just artistic flair. It was a meditation on the fourfold nature of the Christian message. This tradition of encoded memory, carried from the windswept shores of Ireland to the heart of continental Europe, created a quiet archive. It was onto an archive of grand pronouncements, or historical records in the way we think of them now. It was an archive of lineage, of intellectual descent, a particular style of knotwork, a unique abbreviation, a preference for a certain type of acrostic. These were the family resemblances that linked one scriptorium to another, a master to his student. It was a web of knowledge passed down, not through formal treaties, but through the shared, intimate practice of making a book. Each manuscript became a node in a vast, invisible network of minds, a testament to a community bound together by ink, faith, and the love of a well-turned letter. The scribes of Luxeuil and its sister monasteries were custodians of a flame in a dark age, but they were also artists of the unseen. They understood that memory could be housed in the curl of a letter, that a lineage could be traced in the pattern of a margin, and that the deepest truths could be hidden in plain sight, waiting for a quiet mind and a patient heart to uncover them. The ink dries, the vellum ages, but the coded whispers remain, embedded in the page, a silent testament to a world where every detail was part of a greater, sacred story. They built a library of souls, written in a language that transcends words, speaking directly to the part of us that still searches for meaning in the quiet spaces, in the gentle unfolding of a mystery. Let us drift back into the quiet currents of history, where words themselves hold secrets. The very term Holy Grail, in its old French form, asterisk, Sun Grial, asterisk, can be seen through 2 lenses. Was it the asterisk, Sun Grial, asterisk, the Holy Grail, a sacred cup, or was it, with a slight shift in spacing, the asterisk Sangreal, the royal blood? This simple, yet profound, play on words opens a doorway to an entirely different interpretation. It suggests the Grail was not an object at all, but a lineage, a sacred bloodline carried through the generations. The quest for the Grail, then, becomes a search not for a physical relic, but for the heir to this royal blood, the living vessel of a hidden dynasty. This idea reframes the entire Arthurian cycle, turning tales of knights and chivalry into a coded history of a displaced and secret royal family, their identity concealed within the very language of the stories told about them. The legends become deeper, shadowed with meaning. Consider the enigmatic figure of the Fisher King, the Grail's wounded guardian. He reigns over a desolate land, his ailment mirrored in the barrenness of his kingdom. He cannot heal himself. His restoration, and that of his land, depends on the arrival of a hero, a chosen knight who must ask the right question. What if the Fisher King's wound is not physical, but genealogical? What if his sterility represents a broken or interrupted line of succession? His kingdom, the wasteland, is not just a blighted landscape, but a people without their rightful sovereign. The hero's quest, then, is to identify and restore the true heir, to ask the question that reveals the secret of the asterisk sangreal. The healing of the king and the land symbolizes the re-establishment of the legitimate bloodline, bringing vitality and order back to the world. The Fisher King becomes a metaphor for a dynasty in waiting, guarding a sacred heritage until the one who understands its true nature arrives. This concept of a hidden, sacred lineage finds intriguing echoes in the tangible history of the Visigoths in southern France. After the fall of Rome, these Germanic tribes established a powerful kingdom with its heart in the region of Set. They were known to possess immense wealth, treasures plundered from Rome itself, including, according to some accounts, artifacts from the Temple of Solomon. When their kingdom was eventually overthrown, legends persisted that their vast treasure was never truly found. It was said to have been hidden in the intricate cave systems and fortified peaks of the Languedoc, particularly around the mysterious hill of Rennes. Could this treasure have been more than just gold and jewels? Could it have included genealogical records, sacred texts, or objects that proved a royal lineage stretching back through the mists of time? The idea that the Visigothic inheritance was not merely material, but dynastic, connects the historical record with the mythological quest. The hidden treasure becomes a symbol for the hidden bloodline, secreted away in the very landscape that would later become central to the Grail romances. This idea of a person, rather than an object, being the repository of holiness and authority is an ancient one. We see it in the concept of the living vessel of sovereignty. In many cultures, the health and legitimacy of the ruler were directly tied to the prosperity of the nation. The king or queen was not just a political leader, but the physical embodiment of the people's connection to the divine, to the land itself. Their body was the chalice that held the spirit of the nation. If the Grail is indeed a bloodline, then each descendant is a living vessel. They carry within their veins the essence of that sacred inheritance. They are the Grail. This transforms the quest from a search for an external source of power into a recognition of the inherent power within a specific lineage. The authority isn't conferred by a crown or a scepter, but is an intrinsic quality, passed from parent to child. The true sovereign doesn't need to find the Grail. They are the Grail, waiting to be recognized. Their very existence a testament to a power that persists beyond thrones and empires. The intertwining of these threads, the linguistic trick of sangria, the symbolic wound of the Fisher King, the lost treasures of a fallen kingdom, and the ancient belief in a living vessel of power creates a compelling, alternative narrative. It suggests that beneath the surface of myth and legend lies a carefully guarded secret. The stories we've been told about a cup are, perhaps, a veil for a more profound and enduring mystery. The story of a family whose blood was considered royal, sacred, and whose continued existence was a promise of restoration. The quest, in this light, is a journey of discovery, not for an object, but for a person, the heir who could heal the wasteland and restore a lost kingdom, not through conquest, but through the simple fact of their own being. The landscape of southern France, with its Cathar castles and Visigothic ghosts, becomes the stage for this silent, ongoing drama, its secrets whispered on the wind. The symbolism is potent. The cup is a vessel, designed to hold something precious. The most precious thing it could hold, according to this theory, is the blood of Christ. But what if the vessel was not pottery or gold, but a person, a woman? This interpretation posits that the asterisk saying real scene refers to the children of a sacred union, their descendants forming a holy dynasty that has survived in secret throughout the centuries. The Grail, therefore, is the womb, the matriarchal line that carries the sacred blood. This places women at the absolute center of the mystery, not as passive observers, but as the essential conduits of the divine inheritance. The quest for the Grail then becomes a search for the heiress, the queen of the hidden bloodline. It aligns with historical undercurrents, where reverence for the feminine divine was suppressed, but never entirely extinguished. The stories of the Grail, filled with powerful sorceresses and enigmatic ladies of the lake, might be seen as coded references to this sacred feminine principle and the matriarchal lineage that guarded the asterisk sangreal. Think of the landscape itself as a keeper of secrets. The mountains and caves of the Pyrenees are not just passive backdrops. In many esoteric traditions, the earth itself is seen as a living entity, capable of holding memory and energy. The places associated with the Grail legend, Montségur, Rennes-Liche, Glastonbury, are often located at sites of unusual geological properties or ancient pre-Christian worship. It is as if the secret of the bloodline was entrusted not just to human guardians, but to the land itself. The quest to find the Grail might require a deep, intuitive connection to this landscape, an ability to read its signs and listen to its whispers. The treasure of the Visigoths, the tomb of a secret messiah, the location of the Grail Castle are said to be hidden within the earth. This fuses the genealogical mystery with a form of sacred geography, where the map to the secret is written into the very contours of the hills and valleys. The search becomes a pilgrimage, a physical and spiritual journey into a landscape that is itself a vessel, holding the memory of the royal blood. The earth becomes the ultimate guardian of the asterisk sangreal. The long shadow of the eclipse falls not only on the sun, but on the very lineage of kings. A quiet, creeping darkness, not of the heavens, but of the halls of power. In the courts of the Franks, a new title begins to resonate, a whisper that grows into a pronouncement. Mayor of the palace. Once a mere steward of the royal household, the office now swells with an authority the throne itself seems to have shed. The king still wears the crown, but the hand that truly steers the realm belongs to another. It is a slow, methodical transfer, not of gold or land, but of will. The power of command, once the birthright of a king, becomes the prize of the ambitious, the capable, the ruthless. The scepter lies still, while the mayor's staff begins to strike the ground with the rhythm of real governance. Observe the king. His long hair, once the symbol of his sacred power and virility, now a gilded cage. Each strand was said to hold a measure of his divine right, a connection to the mystic origins of his dynasty. To cut it was to sever him from his own legend, to reduce him from a semi-divine figure to a mere mortal. And so, the shears become a political weapon, more potent than a sword. The act is not of violence, but of profound humiliation. A shorn king is a neutered king, paraded for all to see, his powerlessness made manifest. He is sent away not in chains, but in the humble robes of a monk, his crown replaced by the long locks, the pride of the Merovingians, fall to the stone floor, swept away like dust, and with them the last vestiges of an ancient magic. A new era doesn't always arrive with a bang. Sometimes it comes with the soft, deliberate snip of scissors. Into this quiet vacuum steps a man named Pepin. He is a mayor, but he is different. He sees the slow eclipse not as a tragedy, but as an opportunity, a destined alignment. He does not simply wield the king's power. He begins to question the very nature of that power. Why should legitimacy reside in a bloodline that has grown thin and listless? Why should the man who governs not also be the man who reigns? Pepin looks beyond the Frankish court, his gaze settling on a power even greater than ancient lineage, the spiritual authority of Rome. A shift is coming, a profound realignment. He understands that to replace one sacred rite, he needs another. The sanction of a pope, he reasons, might just outweigh the magic of long hair. The gears of a great change begin to turn, slowly, almost silently, as a mayor of the palace dreams of becoming a king, not by force of arms, but by a higher calling. The old world is fading, not in battle, but in a transfer of blessings. Yet, whispers persist in the south, carried on the warm winds from Aquitaine and the sun-drenched coast of Set. They speak of shadows that are not shadows, of forgotten branches of the royal tree, still clinging to life. Rumors tell of a Merovingian prince who escaped the shears, his long hair still intact, hidden away in a remote villa, guarded by loyalists who refused to bend the knee to the new order. Are these mere fables? The desperate hopes of a defeated people? Or does a true heir, a lost king, bide his time in the wild, mountainous lands, waiting for the eclipse to pass? The stories are like ghosts, impossible to grasp, yet their presence is felt. They tell of a secret court, a lineage that did not end in a monastery, but simply went into hiding. In the marketplaces and taverns, they speak of signs and prophecies of a return. This hidden history, whether real or imagined, casts a long, uncertain shadow over the new dawn, a reminder that what is cut down can sometimes grow again, and that not all loose ends are so easily tied. The land holds its breath, listening for a footstep that may never come. In the quiet hum of a workshop, where sawdust smells like sweet earth and the air is thick with the scent of beeswax, traditions are not just remembered, they are lived. These are the domains of guardians, the keepers of crafts that stretched back through time, their secrets passed down not in grand proclamations, but in the subtle language of making. Think of the guild signs that once hung above city streets, a language without words, understood by all who belonged. A carved wooden shoe, a golden pretzel, a pair of scissors each was a quiet claim, a declaration of skill and a promise of quality. They were beacons for those in the know, a silent map of mastery hidden in plain sight. This was a world bound by shared knowledge, where your craft was your identity, and its symbols were your passport. Within these guilds, and beyond them, lore weaves itself into the very fabric of the work. Consider the beekeepers, with their ancient, whispered traditions. The practice of telling the bees about major life events, a birth, a marriage, a passenis. Not mere superstition. It is a profound acknowledgement of the interconnectedness of all life, a recognition of the bees as partners in the delicate dance of pollination and honeymaking. It's a quiet guardianship of a bond between human and insect, a pact maintained through respect and ritual. The lore itself becomes a protective charm, ensuring the hive's health and the keeper's fortune, a secret held between the buzzing colony and its human steward. These traditions are the invisible threads that hold the craft together, imbuing it with a significance that transcends the mere collection of honey. This same sense of sacred duty is found in the cults of patron saints. Every trade had its celestial guardian. Saint Joseph for carpenters, his hands familiar with the grain of wood. Saint Luke for painters, his eyes blessed with a vision to capture light. Saint Crispin for coblers who understood the weariness of a long journey. Praying to a patron saint was more than a plea for divine favor. It was a way of connecting to a lineage of fellow craftspeople, a spiritual guild that spanned heaven and earth. The saint's story became a part of the artisan zone, a source of inspiration and a quiet affirmation of the work's inherent dignity. In their workshops, small icons and whispered prayers were private signals of a shared, sacred heritage. As guilds evolved, so did their methods of preservation. In a world without digital encryption, passwords and secret handshakes were the keys to the kingdom. They were intricate, often changing with the seasons or the rise of a new guildmaster. To know the password was to prove your worth, to show you had completed your apprenticeship and were worthy of the guild's trust. It was a spoken key that unlocked doors to secret meetings, shared resources, and protected knowledge. This verbal tradition ensured that techniques honed over generations remained within the circle of the initiated, safeguarding livelihoods against the unskilled and the unscrupulous. The words themselves held power, a spoken bond of loyalty and shared identity. And then there is the signet ring, perhaps the most personal and potent of these quiet claims, pressed into warm wax. It leaves an impression that is unique, a signature more binding than one written in ink. The signet ring was the artisan's mark, the final seal of approval on a finished piece. It was a declaration. I made this. It meets my standard. For the wearer, it was a constant, tactile reminder of their lineage and their responsibility. It carried the weight of a family name, the honor of a guild, or the authority of a master craftsman. The ring itself was often a masterpiece of the jeweler's art, but its true value lay not in the gold or the gemstone, but in the silent, unbreakable promise. It represented a promise of quality, of identity, and of a legacy passed from one hand to the next. The glazier, fitting stained glass into a cathedral window, follows a pattern passed down through centuries. The lines of lead are not just structural. They are a map of a sacred story, a language of light and color. Each piece is cut and placed with a reverence born of tradition. The knowledge of how to mix the pigments, how to fire the glass to achieve that perfect ruby red or celestial blue, is a guarded secret. This is a quiet claim not on the window itself, but on the ability to channel light, to turn simple sand and fire into a conduit for the divine. The finished work belongs to the ages, but the knowledge, the craft, belongs to the guardian who holds it in their hands and their heart. Even the simple baker, rising before dawn to knead dough, is part of this silent lineage. The starter, the living yeast culture passed from one generation to the next, is a tangible link to the past. It carries the memory of every loaf it has ever raised, the specific way of scoring the bread before it enters the Avena family crest, a simple cross, a unique swirlus, a signature, a quiet claim that this loaf is not just food, but the result of a long, unbroken chain of knowledge and care. It's a craft where the simplest ingredients are transformed through a kind of alchemy, a process protected not by patents, but by the muscle memory in a baker's hands and the living history bubbling in their starter. These traditions are the unseen scaffolding that supports the world of making. They are not loud or boastful. They are the quiet hum of the potter's wheel, the steady rhythm of the weaver's loom, the patient scratch of the engraver's tool. They are the passwords whispered in shadowed halls, the saints' names invoked in morning prayers, the lore shared over a shared meal. Each is a form of guardianship, a way of preserving something precious without locking it away. There are quiet claims on excellence, on heritage, and on the enduring human need to create things of beauty and purpose. They exist in the spaces between words, in the gestures of a skilled hand, in the silent understanding that passes from master to apprentice, ensuring that the fire of craft is never extinguished. In the quiet corners of history, before the grand tapestries were fully woven, the threads began to stir. A restlessness settled over the old stones of Europe, a murmur that traveled from the wind-swept hills of Rennes-le-Château to the silent, shadowed tombs of long-dead kings. Tombs that were not always as peaceful as they seemed. Whispers spoke of disturbed resting places, of secrets not meant for the living, unearthed by accident or by design. These were not tales of treasure hunters, but of something deeper search for a lost lineage, a forgotten truth that lay buried with the bones of Merovingian monks. The landscape itself seemed to hold its breath. In the Languedoc, where the very air feels ancient, stories were told in hushed tones around hearths. They spoke of a secret society, the Priory of Sion, a brotherhood dedicated to protecting a sacred bloodline, a legacy that stretched back through the mists of time. Was it fact or folklore? The lines blurred, as they often do, but the persistence of the legend was a sign in itself. It was a current flowing beneath the surface of the visible world, a hidden stream of knowledge that fed an underground river of esoteric thought. These were not isolated whispers. They connected, forming a web of intrigue that spanned generations. Look closer at the symbols of power that began to re-emerge. The bee, an ancient emblem of the Merovingian kings, a symbol of immortality and divine right, suddenly reappeared, woven into the fabric of imperial ambition. Napoleon himself, centuries later, would adopt the golden bee, stitching it onto his coronation robes, a deliberate echo of that lost dynasty. It was a nod to a power that was not just military or political, but mystical, a claim to a heritage that predated the established order. These fragmented clues, the disturbed tombs, the stories from Sion, the reappearance of the bee were like omens. They were the subtle tremors before the earthquake, the gathering of clouds before the storm. Each one, a piece of a puzzle that no one could yet see in its entirety. The world was unknowingly preparing for a new kind of soldier, a new kind of faith, a new kind of power, an order of warrior monks who would soon stride onto the world stage, their white mantles emblazoned with a stark red cross, carrying with them the weight of these mysteries. The air was thick with premonition. A sense of destiny hung over the Holy Lands and the courts of Europe. It was a time of pilgrimage and prophecy, of crusades and conquests. The knowledge that had been carefully guarded, the secrets whispered in cloisters and hidden in coded manuscripts, were coalescing. They were pointing toward Jerusalem, toward the sacred ground of Temple Mount, where the greatest secrets of all were said to be buried. The stage was being set, the actors unknowingly taking their places. It was as if history itself was conspiring, weaving together these disparate threads of myth, symbol, and ambition into a single, undeniable narrative. The whispers were growing louder, no longer confined to the remote valleys or secret societies. They were beginning to echo in the halls of power, influencing popes and kings. The ground was being consecrated, not just with holy water, but with the blood of martyrs and the ink of scribes, preparing for the arrival of those who would be both guardians and seekers. The story was not yet written, but the prologue was drawing to a close. The age of the Knights Templar was dawning, and its origins were not forged in the heat of a single battle, but in the slow, patient accumulation of these ancient, resonant echoes. A tomb opened in the dark, a story told by the fire, a golden bee on an emperor's cloacal harbingers of what was to come. The world was holding its breath, waiting for the first knight to take his vow, for the first stone of the temple to be uncovered, for the great secret to finally be brought into the light. The silence that followed these portents was not an absence of noise, but a space filled with potential, a hushed anticipation for the chapter that was about to begin. The seeds had been planted long ago in the fertile ground of legend and lineage, and now they were about to bloom in the most unexpected and powerful way imaginable. The Templars were coming, and the world would never be the same. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the quiet corridors of the past. If you feel the pull of these mysteries as I do, consider subscribing and joining our community of seekers. Until next time, keep listening to the whispers.